The lights of Hollywood never dimmed. They burned, white, hot, relentless, demanding, as if the sun itself had been captured and fastened to a soundstage. And within that light, legends were born. But what is never told in the shimmering advertisements, in the polished interviews and magazine spreads, is what that light does to a face, to a body, to a soul. Hollywood was not a city but a dream machine, built to take ordinary men and women and grind them into myth. A wrinkle was a betrayal. A grey hair was an ending. A moment of weakness was a scandal. To be a star was to be flawless, eternally young, eternally desired, forever suspended in that cruel radiance. Yet no one, not even the brightest star, could live untouched by time. Behind the cameras, away from the applause, the stories grew darker. Pills slipped into handbags to calm shaking hands before the next take. Cigarettes stacked like soldiers to fight fatigue that no rest could cure. Bottles drained in silent dressing rooms, laughter forced out through lips that had forgotten what joy really was. Each addiction, strange as it might appear to the public, was rarely about indulgence alone. It was survival. It was escape. It was a whispered bargain with the self. If I burn tonight, perhaps tomorrow the audience will still love me. We remember these stars in black and white stills, frozen in time, as if they never aged, never faltered. But in truth, the same spotlight that made them immortal also made them fragile. The story you are about to hear is not only about fame, but about the cost of being adored by millions. It is about the quiet price paid in shadows, while the world saw only sparkle. Greta Garbo was not like the others. Where most stars burned with a kind of desperate hunger for light, Garbo seemed born from it. She did not chase the cameras chased her, mesmerized by a face that seemed sculpted out of stillness. In the silent films of her youth, she spoke without speaking. A tilt of her chin, the shadow of her eyes, the curve of her mouth, they were more eloquent than a page of dialogue. She became Hollywood's Sphinx, a riddle wrapped in satin, a mystery that audiences would never solve. Her beauty was not the soft prettiness of others. It was sharp, monumental, carved from marble and ice. She looked untouchable, eternal, as if even time itself would hesitate before daring to place a wrinkle on her face. But Garbo knew better. Beneath the painted lips and perfect lighting, she carried a secret truth. Youth was temporary, beauty was fragile, and fame was a bargain no one could keep. Unlike many of her contemporaries, Garbo did not wait for the spotlight to dim. She did not linger for scraps of applause once the cheers began to fade. At the height of her power, she slipped away. No farewell tour, no grand announcement. She simply stopped appearing, stopped performing, stopped letting the cameras possess her. She left Hollywood as if she were leaving a lover she could no longer trust. The world could not understand. Stars were meant to be consumed, their brilliance drained until nothing remained. But Garbo refused to give her audience the spectacle of decline. She denied them the slow unraveling of beauty, the tragic image of youth collapsing under the weight of time. If she was to age, she would do so privately, not as a public performance. And so, Garbo became a phantom. In New York, she walked the streets cloaked in scarves, oversized sunglasses, heavy coats. She passed crowds unnoticed, the goddess transformed into a woman. Those who did recognize her often hesitated. Was this truly Garbo, the immortal face of the screen? The photographs that occasionally leaked into tabloids told a different story from the one frozen on film reels. There she was, heavier, lined, tired. Not the goddess, but the woman. A cruel contrast, some said. To others, it was her ultimate act of rebellion. Because in truth, Greta Garbo had given Hollywood what it demanded: perfection, mystery, beauty. And then she took back what was hers: her aging, her privacy, her humanity. She refused to let the cameras document the slow betrayal of a time. She chose to be forgotten rather than pitied. And yet, in choosing silence, she remained eternal. The Garbo we remember is not the woman in scarves, not the weary figure photographed on New York sidewalks. The Garbo we carry is the Sphinx, the face bathed in silver light, the eyes that pierced through celluloid. By stepping away, she preserved her myth. By vanishing, she became unforgettable. Greta Garbo was the woman who walked away, and in doing so, she became a riddle that no passing years could solve. Marlon Brando was not simply an actor, he was a thunderclap across the quiet skies of Hollywood. When he stepped onto the stage in A Streetcar Named Desire, audiences had never seen anything like him. He was raw, combustible, and utterly alive, a man whose body, voice, and presence did not perform but erupted. In his youth, Brando was the very definition of a force of nature, sweating intensity with every line, his beauty dangerous and untamed. He changed the art of acting forever, tearing away from the stiff traditions of old Hollywood and giving the screen something it had never known before: truth. But hurricanes, no matter how powerful, always leave wreckage in their wake. For Brando, the years that followed were less a decline and more a haunting. He seemed almost cursed by the myth he created in his youth, a myth too heavy for even his broad shoulders to carry. By the time the 1970s arrived, the Brando who once made the world ache with desire had begun to transform. His body swelled, his once sculpted jaw softened, and the confident lines of his face blurred into exhaustion. The press, always eager for cruelty, turned him into an object of ridicule, the fallen Adonis, the god who could not keep his throne. Yet those who knew him intimately spoke of another truth. His change was not born from mere indulgence or laziness, as tabloids suggested. It came from grief, from heartbreak, from the gnawing disillusionment of a man who had never quite fit inside the golden box of fame. Brando, for all his power, was always searching for meaning, for gentleness, for a world less cruel than the one he inhabited. The tragedies of his personal life weighed on him like stones. The suicide of his daughter, the scandal of his son's trial, the endless betrayals of those who sought to use his name. His body grew heavier as if mirroring the unbearable sorrow he carried within. Still, even as the years reshaped him, his eyes never lost their fire. They remained the eyes of the young man who had broken Hollywood wide open, soulful, mischievous, and perpetually haunted. They glimmered with the secrets of a man who had seen too much, felt too deeply, and resisted the role of being anyone's myth. When he appeared in The Godfather, his transformation into Don Vito Corleone was not simply an act. It was as though he had channeled his own aging, his own disillusionment, into something timeless. His later career revealed that while his body had changed, his genius had not. Brando's story is not simply one of decline, but of exposure. Aging made him a stranger to the marble idol he once embodied. But in stripping away that idol, he showed us something even more profound, the vulnerability of the legend himself. In the lines of his face and the heaviness of his frame, we saw a man who no longer belonged to Hollywood's fantasies, but instead to the raw, unvarnished truth of human existence. The world wanted him to remain forever, the young god of Streetcar, but Brando refused. He aged not gracefully, but honestly. He carried his weight, his sorrow, and his rebellion in full view, as if daring us to look away. And yet, for all the mockery, for all the cruel headlines, audiences never could. Because even in his undoing, Brando remained magnetic. His collapse was not a fall, but a revelation, the reminder that even legends are flesh, and that behind every myth lies a man who bleeds, mourns, and longs for peace. Marlon Brando aged not as a statue weathering away, but as a storm that finally quieted, leaving behind a horizon forever altered. Bette Davis was never meant to be a beauty queen of Hollywood. She was not sculpted like Garbo, nor smouldering like Dietrich. Her power was never in the shape of her lips or the softness of her skin. It was in her eyes, those bold, unblinking eyes that could slice through a man, that could fill a theatre with their command. From the very beginning, Davis understood that her strength lay in defiance. She was never content to smile sweetly and play the ingenue. She wanted battles, confrontations, characters with grit. In films like All About Eve and Jezebel, Davis carved out roles that were layered, contradictory, and alive. She was fiery, unapologetic, and always willing to make herself unlikable if it meant finding truth on screen. She rewrote the rules of stardom by refusing to be ornamental. Hollywood worshipped her, but it also feared her. For every accolade, there were whispers that she was difficult, abrasive, too much. Davis never cared. She lit her cigarettes, delivered her lines, and let her work speak. But time has a way of testing even the strongest spirits. By the late 1970s and into the 1980s, Davis's body began to betray her. She suffered multiple strokes, survived breast cancer, and endured the cruel erosion of vitality that comes with age. Where once she had been a blazing torch of energy, she became thinner, more fragile, her face hollowed and marked by illness. Tabloids, always hungry for cruelty, captured her gaunt frame and sneered that she was unrecognizable. Yet Bette Davis never surrendered to pity. She wore her scars openly, even defiantly. When she appeared in interviews after her surgeries and illnesses, she still cracked jokes, still lit cigarettes, still stared straight into the camera with those same dagger eyes. The beauty standards of Hollywood had always been her enemy, and in aging she fought her last and fiercest war, refusing to let others write her obituary before she was gone. What the tabloids called decline, her admirers recognized as courage. In her frailty, Davis exposed the raw truth that so many stars tried to hide, that aging is not glamorous, that the body falters but that spirit can endure. She did not drape herself in scarves like Garbo or retreat to private islands like Brando. She aged in public, on screen, in interviews, with all the honesty that had always defined her. Her final years were a paradox. To some, she was a shell of her former self, weakened, reduced. But to others, she had never been stronger, because there is strength in facing mortality without disguise. There is bravery in speaking when the world wants silence. Bette Davis's face at the end of her life was not the face of a faded star. It was the face of a warrior, a survivor of Hollywood's harshest cruelties, of personal heartbreaks, of sickness and recovery. The lines across her skin were not the ruin of beauty, but the record of battles fought and lived. When audiences look back at her career, they do not remember her for a single role or a single frame of youth. They remember the fire that never dimmed, the honesty that never faltered. Even in the face of death, she carried herself with the same defiance that had made her unforgettable. Aging did not diminish Bette Davis, it revealed her essence. And in that revelation, she gave us her most human and heroic performance of all. Orson Welles arrived like a comet, dazzling the world before it even knew what to call him. He was barely 24 when Citizen Kane premiered, a film so audacious, so perfectly constructed that it redefined cinema itself. He was not just a filmmaker, but a magician, a stage conjurer, a radio trickster, a man who seemed to bend entire mediums to his will. His face, in those early days, was angular and strong, his eyes restless with curiosity, his voice rolling like thunder across a stage. Welles embodied genius at full blaze, and the world could not look away. But the arc of his life mirrored the tragic sweep of the stories he loved to tell. Genius burns brightly, but brilliance can be heavy to carry. As the decades passed, Welles seemed to wrestle not only with Hollywood, but with himself. Studios distrusted him, fearing his independence and unruly vision. Budgets collapsed beneath his ambitions. Projects stalled. scattered across continents like fragments of an unfinished epic. The man who had once been crowned the future of film found himself begging for financing, often humiliated, often betrayed, and as those battles wore on, his body bore the weight of disappointment. The young prodigy who once strode across stages in sleek black cloaks now appeared swollen, immense, as though every unmade film, every abandoned script, every sleepless night had taken form in flesh. His beard grew long and snowy, his frame a fortress of indulgence and exhaustion. To the tabloid eye, it was a simple story, the genius who had let himself go. To the unkind, Welles had become a parody of himself, appearing on talk shows to crack jokes about his size, or hawking wine in commercials, his once thunderous authority reduced to spectacle. Yet that reading misses the truth. Welles was not undone by laziness or vanity, he was consumed by appetite. Appetite not only for food and drink, though those were certainly part of his mythology, but appetite for art, for creation, for worlds too large to ever be contained. He devoured literature, devoured music, devoured stories, always searching for the next impossible canvas. Hollywood, tight-fisted and risk-averse, could not feed that hunger. And so, the man ate what the world denied him. He consumed himself. Still, even in decline, he radiated. His voice, deeper now, resonant like an organ in a cathedral, could command silence with a single phrase. His eyes sparkled with mischief, even when his body appeared exhausted. To sit with him, friends recalled, was to sit inside a whirlwind of anecdotes, philosophy, jokes, and dreams too bold for the world to realize. He was larger than life in every sense, both physically and spiritually. Welles's aging was more than the expansion of a waistline or the deepening of wrinkles. It became symbolic, a body that carried the weight of unfinished dreams. His girth was not just flesh, but metaphor, as though genius itself had exacted a toll. To watch him shuffle onto a stage in his later years was to see not merely a man, but the wreckage of ambition too vast for any one lifetime. And yet, there was something deeply human in his fall. Unlike the myth of the untouchable prodigy, Welles aged into a man who could laugh at himself, who could still create in scraps and fragments, who could speak with warmth even when the world mocked him. His final image is not of ruin, but of resilience, a man consumed by his own appetite for beauty, who gave more than his body could ever hold. Orson Welles did not fade gently. He devoured life, and in the end, it devoured him too. Judy Garland's story is one of those rare Hollywood tales that feels both luminous and unbearable, a life shaped by brilliance and broken by the machine that manufactured her stardom. She was barely out of childhood when her innocence was signed away in studio contracts. At 16, she was no longer simply a girl. She was Dorothy Gale, a cultural icon pressed forever into the amber of cinema. The world saw a bright-eyed child chasing rainbows, but behind the camera, Judy was handed bottles instead of toys, pills to wake her up, pills to keep her thin, pills to help her sleep. Her lullabies were chemical, her playground was a stage, her companions the shadows of grown men who measured her body as if it were a prop. The years that followed carved deep marks upon her, not just in her features, but in her very spirit. In her 20s, her voice, that trembling yet soaring river of sound, became her salvation and her prison. Studio executives and audiences demanded the impossible: eternal youth, eternal joy, eternal perfection. By her 30s, the cracks had begun to show. Beneath the stage lights, her skin carried the paleness of exhaustion. Her eyes, once sparkling, now held shadows that not even makeup could conceal. Pills numbed her body but not her soul. Applause filled the theatre, but when the curtain dropped, silence rushed in like a cruel reminder of how alone she was. By the time Judy entered her 40s, the toll was undeniable. Her frame, weakened by decades of dependency, seemed almost too fragile to carry the weight of her voice. The girl who once embodied vitality now staggered under its absence. There were nights when she couldn't quite reach the notes that had once soared effortlessly, and audiences, conditioned by Hollywood's cruelty, recoiled at the reality of a woman no longer frozen in the bloom of youth. Tabloids mocked her decline, critics noted her unreliability, yet few paused to remember that she had never been given the chance to simply be human. Her tragedy was not in her face, nor her figure, but in the endless cruelty of expectation. Garland had been branded as America's sweetheart, the girl who could never grow old, never stumble, never stop singing. But time moved forward as it does for all of us, and instead of grace, it handed Judy fragility. The very humanity she displayed, the trembling hands, the raw emotion, the visible exhaustion, was deemed a betrayal of her legend. Yet, paradoxically, that was when she became most real, most heartbreaking, most unforgettable. Even as her health crumbled, Garland's resilience astonished those who truly looked closer. She sang because she had to, because the stage was the only place where she still felt alive, still felt embraced. Night after night, even with a voice frayed by time and trembling from strain, she poured out what remained of her heart. It wasn't perfection anymore. It was something braver. A breaking voice, yes, but one that carried the entire weight of a stolen childhood, 1,000 betrayals, and an undying desire to be loved. Her aging was not gentle nor kind. Hollywood had given her neither peace nor rest, and her body bore the evidence of that theft. Yet there was an unbearable humanness to Judy Garland's decline. In her fragility, she reflected the truth of us all, that beauty fades, that brilliance dims, that no applause can quiet the ache of a life lived too quickly. And still, when she stood beneath the lights, battered and weary, she gave her audience everything she had left. Judy Garland never found rest in life, but in her struggle, in her courage to keep singing even when the notes faltered, she revealed something immortal, the raw, aching beauty of a soul that refused to vanish quietly. Outro chapter, The Mirror. Hollywood hates aging. In Hollywood has never been the simple arithmetic of time. It has always been an act of betrayal. The camera, once a lover, becomes a cruel archivist. It records everything, the creases deepening at the corners of the eyes, the tremor slipping into once commanding voices, the way posture softens under invisible weights. Audiences too betray their idols, unwilling to walk with them into the winter years. They want Garbo forever in shadow, Brando forever defiant, Davis forever sharp-eyed, Welles forever booming with brilliance, Garland forever skipping down that painted yellow brick road. Hollywood demands eternal summers, and when autumn comes, it looks away in disgust. The truth is harsher still. Behind every wrinkle, mocked on a magazine cover, lies decades of sleepless nights, of battles with substances that numbed more than they healed, of grief folded into performances, of bodies worked past breaking points because contracts demanded it. Stardom, for all its sparkle, was an extraction, youth and vitality mined until nothing remained but exhaustion. What the world called decay was not neglect. It was the natural consequence of having given too much. Garbo's silence was not cowardice, but a reclamation of self after decades of being consumed. Brando's weight was not sloth, but armor, a body building walls when the soul had been stripped bare. Davis's scars, etched into her face, were the proof of battles fought with courage, battles against both illness and the industry's relentless cruelty. Welles's excess was not a weakness of appetite alone, but the hunger of a man who lived too expansively for the narrow budgets and narrow judgments of Hollywood. And Garland, fragile, luminous Garland, carried a wound that never closed, her voice trembling under the weight of a stolen childhood. Their so-called decline was never a fall. It was a revelation. It revealed what Hollywood had fought hardest to conceal, that these gods and goddesses were human beings all along, They were never marble statues, never myths carved from perfection. They were flesh, bone, and spirit, vulnerable to time, to sorrow, to the same mortality that stalks us all. If their aging shocked us, it is because we had mistaken performance for permanence. And yet, in decline there is an unexpected poetry. In the lines carved across a once spotless face, there is the story of 1,000 late nights under blinding studio lights. In the softening of bodies once sculpted by costume departments and publicists, there is the quiet refusal to keep performing offstage. In the shaking voices that once thundered, there is fragility that carries its own haunting beauty. These transformations are not losses, but truths, and truths, though less flattering than fantasies, are infinitely more human. The tragedy, then, is not that they aged poorly, but that the world could not recognize their aging as beautiful. A culture that worships youth has no language for grace in decline, but we, the late-night dreamers, the watchers in the dark, can choose differently. We can remember them not as tarnished idols, but as luminous souls who bore the unbearable weight of our collective desire. They carried our fantasies until it broke them. For that, they deserve reverence, not ridicule. Perhaps that is the final lesson Hollywood cannot teach us, but these stars can. Beauty fades, applause dies, the spotlight cools, but the stories endure. And in choosing to remember them not as flawless illusions but as fragile human beings, we restore to them a grace the world denied. Their decline was not the end of their artistry, but the unveiling of their humanity. And in that humanity, there is something more lasting than youth: truth.